Tokyo Xanadu is very much a Falcom game. For those unfamiliar with the company, this of course means nothing, but those who are will get what I mean. Tokyo Xanadu has an interesting and engaging combat system, purposeful world building with a lot of potential within this game, and maybe even into the future if Falcom ever decides to come back to it, likable characters, and a soundtrack that's a lot of fun to bop to. The game doesn't suck you in as much as it draws you in slowly over time until you reach the end and realize you had a nice time with it. If a social simulation, action combat, dungeon crawling mix of Japanese school life and invasion of Japan by mysterious forces is the sort of game you're looking for, Tokyo Xanadu will have you well covered. Tokyo Xanadu is a spin-off game from the Dragon Slayer series, specifically 1985's Dragon Slayer 2 Xanadu. Its connections to and inspiration from said game and the other games spawned from it are likely better explained by someone who has played those games. From my own research, it's hard to separate the inspirations given to Tokyo Xanadu that were not simply inspirations Dragon Slayer gave to the entire industry, as the game is considered an inspiration for games dating back to The Legend of Zelda and the original Ys games. Therefore, I'll mostly talk about Tokyo Xanadu as its own thing separate from the Xanadu/Dragon Slayer connection for the rest of the video. Tokyo Xanadu is an action RPG with some social simulation aspects as well. The game was developed by Nihon Falcom and localized and published in the West not by either Xseed or NISA, but by Axis Games, although it is still the only Falcom game localized by them. The original game came out in 2015 for the PS Vita and was given a Western release in June of 2017. In between those releases though, Falcom released an updated re-release called Tokyo Xanadu EX Plus for the PS4. This version also came to the West in December of 2017, along with a PC version. As of the publication of this video, Tokyo Xanadu remains the most recent game released by Falcom that is not a part of the Ys or Trails series. Critical reception to the games were okay, with the Vita and PS4 versions hitting 74 and 75 on Metacritic respectively. Fans have been somewhat kinder to the game with higher user Metacritic scores and a very positive rating on Steam, but it's clear the game didn't set the world on fire. Sales-wise, the game topped Japan's sales charts upon its first release on the Vita, and there were rumors that Falcom was interested in developing it into a new series due to the success, although as of yet, no other games have been announced. You play as Ko Tokasaka, a second-year high school student at Morimiya Academy in the fictional Japanese city of Morimiya. One night, he sees his classmate Asuka Hiragi getting cornered by a couple guys in an alley, but as he rushes in to try to help, something strange happens. The gate opens up, transporting them all to a strange world inhabited by demons called greeds that Asuka defeats before wiping Ko and the other guys' memories. Unsurprisingly though, Ko gets sucked in again when his childhood friend Shiori is pulled into a gate and threatened by the greeds. This time, he is able to conjure up his own weapon called a soul device and fight alongside Asuka to save Shiori. After this, Ko and Asuka team up to push back against the greeds and investigate the strange events haunting Morimiya, along with some classmates recruited along the way. They dive deeper into what Asuka calls the eclipse. Over time, the cause and nature of the disturbances in Morimiya will become clear, and it will be up to our party to prevent the coming danger. The writing of the game is standard Falcom fare in a mostly good way. It is easy to care for these characters, and each party member has a well-developed life and interests outside of their common struggle against the greeds. Tokyo Xanadu does have a fairly large initial cast of major characters though, and I feel the game suffered somewhat from this broad focus because it gave each character less time for proper focus and development. The friendship episodes I'll talk about later do help with that, but as you can't do every one of them, some characters are going to miss out. The cast does have good chemistry across the board though, which is a major benefit for the game. One thing that did stand out to me was the difference in how characters talk to try and match the urban fantasy real-world style that Tokyo Xanadu has, unlike Falcom's other games. Either Falcom or Axis, as the localizers, really tried to embrace some slang with mixed results. It is amusing to see these terms appearing, even if it dates the game sometimes. If you enjoy Falcom's usual writing style, I think you'll enjoy Tokyo Xanadu. It takes few risks, but also avoids a couple of the pitfalls that Falcom has fallen into in recent years when it comes to writing. Tokyo Xanadu has a couple gameplay aspects, including some social simulation alongside the dungeon crawling and the eclipse. The social simulation is structured fairly similar to Trails of Cold Steel if you have played that game. On free days, Ko can travel around the city to various locations talking to people. He will have a main quest that will progress the story, but he can also complete side quests to help out people in the city, student and otherwise, who have posted their troubles on the social media site Nyar. By completing side quests, you get monetary and item rewards and also points towards your virtue stat. Ko has 3 social stats to upgrade over the game. Wisdom is upgraded by reading along with answering questions right during the main story. Courage is upgraded by doing well in dungeons, and Virtue from side quest completion. These are necessary to upgrade to get the true ending, but you'll get there so long as you don't ignore every NPC and book you come across. There are plenty of recurring characters beyond the main party, and as usual, many NPCs to interact with in the city who have their own stories play out during the game. Tokyo Xanadu doesn't have as extensive world building as the Trails games, but Falcom did still try and make Morimiya feel alive as a location. Like Cold Steel, you may also have friendship episodes that you can complete with party members or friends of the party. They are limited in number below the amount of people available for friendship episodes, so unless you do a New Game Plus run, you're going to have to pick and choose which characters to bond with. Elevating a party member's bonds though can unlock stronger attacks and skills in battle, so I do think it is worth focusing most of your energy on the party members. As for dungeon exploring, there are quite a few labyrinths that you'll encounter in the Eclipse. These are not procedurally generated, so I can forgive some simplicity in the design as there are over 30 of them in the game. I did find though that while the design was simple, it was also engaging and usually had a good balance between frustration and challenge, ice sections aside. While the main focus here is the action combat, there are other things to concentrate on as you explore around, such as locating treasure, solving some basic puzzles, and even some light platforming in sections. After completing an Eclipse, but before fighting the final boss of the area, you'll get a results screen and get graded on how you did. The grade is based on several things: speed of completion, damage taken, greeds defeated, treasure collected, objects broken, elemental kills, and maximum combo reached. Having all of these factors was actually really helpful because it meant that in order to get the S rank for each area, you could try different methods. A speed run to get the fastest time with little damage could do it, but you could also methodically destroy every enemy and object and find every treasure to get that top rank. There's no dominant strategy to getting that top rank and getting the most points for your courage stat. If you didn't get the best rank though, don't fret, you can retry whenever you have free time in game. When it comes to combat, you may remember I mentioned elemental kills on the factors you're graded on for the results screen. Yes, Tokyo Xanadu uses an elemental system of 5 elements: fire, wind, spirit, steel, and shadow. Each greed has an element, as does each party member depending on their master core. Fire is strong against wind, wind against steel, steel against spirit, spirit against fire, and shadow against itself. By defeating enemies with the proper element, you get an elemental kill. But because you can't have every single party member available when going through a dungeon, it is helpful to know what enemies are awaiting you in the dungeon. And thankfully, the game will tell you on the loadout screen before you begin the dungeon, so you can adjust your party and/or master cores accordingly. Your party in battle consists of 3 members: the character you're controlling, your companion, and then a support character. You can swap between any of them at any point in battle. The support character heals over time, so it's wise to swap out a heavily damaged or status afflicted character for the support one. In the action combat system, there are 4 basic attacks that you can use: a standard attack, a ranged magic attack, a flying attack, and a power attack that needs to be charged before unleashed. The ranged, flying, and power attacks take SP to use, but that's easily regenerated so long as you do some standard attacks to charge it. Each character has different attack values, making them better at certain attacks, although this can be changed or enhanced with accessories or equipped elements. In addition to their elemental weaknesses, enemies can also be strong against either melee or ranged attacks. Most enemies are neutral, but if you encounter an enemy strong against ranged, it doesn't matter if you have the elemental advantage. It's time to switch up your battle strategy. Note, power attacks and flying attacks bypass any melee/ranged strength, likely because they're harder to pull off than standard and ranged attacks. It's not all about attacking all the time though, as you do have a dodge you can use that gives you some temporary invulnerability from enemies. This isn't an East game system though. A successful dodge doesn't give you any bonus to follow up attacks, which was an adjustment for me at least. At long last, once you've defeated a greed, you can collect gems from them that can be sold at certain stores back in Moramia. They also occasionally drop materials used to upgrade skills. That's not all for attacks though, as you have a couple special moves you can make that can turn a battle to your advantage. X strikes are strong attacks that cannot be interrupted and prevent you from being damaged for the duration of the strike with flashy graphics, and can be joined by a character with a high enough soul level. You can also activate a mode called X Drive that will call in your companion character and allow you to both attack an enemy with effective attacks regardless of elements for a period of time. Lastly, the EX version of the game introduces EX skills, a flashy, unique strike that can do significant damage and some even interrupt attacks. Tokyo Xanadu truly gives you a lot of options as to how to fight enemies, and made me thoughtful in how I chained together attacks and skills to defeat them. Most standard enemies though, you won't need any of these extra skills for though, but the bosses, of course, are a different matter. The boss construction I think was really well done. Many of them have unique attack patterns, different gimmicks that never feel broken or unfair, and solid enough designs. These are the enemies you should be using everything you have for, and pulling off that great combination of attacks is extremely satisfying. It makes this a surprisingly well-developed combat system for a first try at the Tokyo Xanadu formula. As with most Falcom games, there is plenty of side content, and Tokyo Xanadu rivals Trails of Cold Steel in this area. There is an entire arcade in the city that has numerous games you can play, including fishing, Gates of Avalon, which is just Blade from Cold Steel, and a magical girl Elisa whack-a-mole game, which is Whack-a-Mishi instead. Side note, there are a lot of little references to Ys and Trails as in-universe media, so have fun with that. For those looking for something a little more active, there is the skateboarding minigame. Beyond minigames, you can also collect books, recipes, and character profiles which can help with social stats, world building, or in combat if you cook some good food. You can also collect items to decorate Ko's room or presents for party members to improve your bonds. Of course, all of this is completely optional, so you can choose how much or how little you engage with the side content. But there is plenty there to do if you want a break from the main story, and of course, there are some nice rewards for succeeding. I mentioned before about some of the stuff in the EX Plus version of Tokyo Xanadu, but it is quite a bit. I'd even say it's the biggest addition to a Falcom game for a re-release ever. The PS4/PC version adds in side stories in between each chapter that allows other characters to take over the spotlight from Ko. I find these very helpful in gaining insight into characters or previewing future developments in the story. There is now an after story to the main game beyond the epilogue and true ending, just in case you wanted even more stuff to pad out your playtime. The EX skills changed up gameplay, and it was stated that the game was made more difficult, but I can't attest to that having not played the Vita version. They did also add in some new difficulty modes though. Lastly, the room decoration and the events that arise from doing that are additions for EX Plus. It is clear that this version is the definitive version of the game, and I advise anyone who can to get the PS4 or PC versions rather than the original Vita. At last, it's time to talk about the presentation. The game uses the same engine as Trails of Cold Steel, and that's exactly what the game looks like. A modern, urban version of Cold Steel. In spite of the similarity, the game does try to distinguish between the games with character designs and outfit choices. I do think the game suffers a little in keeping variety in the environments for being in a city, and specifically only one city pretty much the whole game. They do try to rectify this issue though in the dungeons, which have a lot more variety even if they are structurally very similar. You'll go between open garden-like levels to underground tombs and all sorts. While not particularly memorable, the environmental and character designs have their charm and do what they need to do. Musically, the game has quite a few good tracks. While there is certainly overlap between the music types you hear in Tokyo Xanadu and other Falcom games, including an actual crossover of one track, that doesn't mean the soundtrack isn't good. The composers know what works from other Falcom games and utilize that knowledge here to capture the environment of the city and the excitement of battle. The UI and UX is serviceable in the game. Some of the menus within menus can make accessing information cumbersome, but it is all there and organized in a consistent manner. The game does only have a Japanese VA track to go with the English text, and predictably it is not expanded, so Ko is silent more often than the other characters, because that's what Falcom does with their main characters now. While the localization was for the most part good, I did notice as I got later in the game that there were quite a few typos that didn't get cleaned up in editing. None of this prevents the game from being enjoyable, but it might be jarring for those coming from Falcom games without these issues. On a more positive note though, the PC port is good. No problems throughout my playthrough. Tokyo Xanadu is a worthwhile play, especially for those with an interest in Falcom developed games. Given its more experimental nature, I'm willing to give some leeway in areas where the game falls a bit short, and it's easy to look past those when other areas are really strong. I think the combat system is a well-constructed and fun system that kept me pumped from beginning to end, and the music also was a standout feature. Tokyo Xanadu is a solid game that still could be a launching point for more games if Falcom ever wants to return to it. I hope you enjoyed the video. As always, leaving a like helps power up the channel's sole device as we battle the greeds of the YouTube algorithm. Let me know in the comments your thoughts on the video or game, and subscribe to keep up with the channel. It won't be happening anytime soon, but my next Falcom adventure will likely be with Zwei. Thank you for watching. Have a great day, and happy gaming.